Let me thank Senators Kennedy and Van Hollen for joining me today, and I also want to acknowledge those who may not be able to make it, Senator Cochran, Senator Rubio, and Senator Warren, all who are original sponsors of the legislation that we're going to speak about today. We may span the political spectrum and serve different regions of the country, but we all represent Americans devastated by powerful floods in recent years, only to find themselves at the mercy of a flood insurance program that is tone deaf and unresponsive to their needs.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, both senators. I'm honored to be here today with my colleagues. The American people deserve a national flood insurance program that looks like somebody designed it on purpose. And that's what this bill will do. It is a bipartisan bill. We are having members join throughout the morning, and we'll have a final list for you of all the Republicans and Democrats who are authoring this legislation at the conclusion of our remarks. To state the obvious, if you own a home and you have homeowners insurance, you're not covered for flood. You have to buy flood insurance, and it's tough to find. Generally, you have to buy it from the federal government. The National Flood Insurance Program is expiring in September, so it is urgent that we act. In my state, in Louisiana, it is difficult to overstate the importance. Our economy in Louisiana is about $220 billion a year. If you add up all the goods and services we produce every year, it's right at $220 billion a year. Without flood insurance, you can cut that in half. You can absolutely cut that in half. So this is an incredibly important to my state, but also to New Jersey, to Maryland, to every state. I know some folks think they don't have a problem with flooding. Let me tell you something. We had this experience last year in Louisiana. I don't care where you live. If you get 23 inches of rain in 2 days, you're going to flood, and you're going to need flood insurance. You can be on Pikes Peak or Mount Everest, and you get 23 inches of rain, you're going to flood, and you're going to wish you had flood insurance. Here's what, in a nutshell, our SAFE bill, as I call it, would do. It calls for a 6-year authorization. Now, obviously, we would prefer a longer authorization, but we're trying to be realistic in terms of what can pass. We settled on 6-year reauthorization. This bill is about affordability. It doesn't do any good to offer somebody insurance if they can't afford it. And it doesn't do any good to offer people flood insurance if they can't afford it. This bill will cap increases for homeowners at 10% a year. That's a big step, because if you look at what we have now, flood insurance can go up 18% for a homeowner, and if it's your second home or your commercial establishment, it can go up 25%. So our first goal was to make the insurance affordable. This bill is going to save about $400 million a year. Now, we do that by suspending interest payments on the $25 billion flood insurance program debt for 6 years. We're going to take that $400 million and use it for mitigation in part. It's a lot cheaper to pay on the front end than on the back end. And by mitigation, I'm talking about low-interest loans for homeowners to elevate their homes. I'm talking about flood walls. I'm talking about levees. We're going to spend more of our resources preventing floods. It'll be better for the homeowner. It'll be better for the commercial establishment, and I'm telling you, it'll be better for the American taxpayer. It caps, we will also save money by capping the compensation on the write your own insurance companies. As you know, we depend on private insurance companies to help us administer the program, and we're grateful for their help. But they don't have any risk, and so their compensation ought to be reasonable. Another provision that we've added to the bill in terms of the write your own program, the administrator at FEMA who is in charge of flood insurance testified before our banking committee a few months ago. and his testimony startled me. He said, "I have no authority to fire a lawyer or an engineer or a consultant who is working for one of the write your own insurance companies unless they're convicted of a crime or they're disbarred." This bill will fix that. If we have, and most of the people who help administer the program in the private sector, the lawyers, the engineers, the consultants, do a good job. They do a good job of representing the program and trying to help the people who bought the insurance and are entitled to get help. But some of them don't. And there have been some really bad actors, lawyers, engineers, and others. This bill is going to give the head of FEMA the authority to call them up and say, "You're fired." There'll be an appeals process if they want to appeal, but in the meantime, they're still fired. We want to protect the integrity of the National Flood Insurance Program, but if you're working for it and you see your job is trying to deny benefits to homeowners who paid their money, had a flood, and now are getting punished because they can't get their money, punished twice, then there's no room for you in the National Flood Insurance Program. And this bill is going to do something about that. It also streamlines the claims process to make it easier for our people to actually get the insurance they paid for. As I said, it's going to provide more oversight for Congress of FEMA. And it does finally, it calls for state-of-the-art mapping. We're going to use some of the money to make sure that we actually know which areas are likely to flood and which won't. In some cases, that'll actually save money on premiums. As Bob mentioned, LIDAR is one of the technologies that is considered state-of-the-art. We're not telling folks to use LIDAR, but we're just saying we're going to give you the resources, use state-of-the-art technology so we can get accurate maps. I'm very proud to be working on this bill at a time when I know reasonable people always disagree, but we have a lot of reasonable people that are disagreeing over a lot of subjects in the Senate right now, and I understand that. That's part of the process of democracy. But this is something that we have bipartisan support on. I'm proud to be standing here with these two gentlemen, and I'm proud to be working with the other senators who could not be here today. Thank you so much for coming.
We may be from coastal states, but the last time I dealt with flood insurance, our colleagues from North Dakota, for example, that's not a coastal state, were concerned about the basement challenges as it related to flood insurance, so it really permeates the entire country. With that, we're all happy to answer your questions. Jonathan?
Governor Christie has talked about saying, given the problems after Sandy, flood insurance should be privatized. What's your response to that?
Well, look, I'm always willing, speaking for myself, I'm always willing to consider the private sector, but I have to be honest with you. You have to worry about cherry picking because at the end of the day, insurance is about spreading risk. And the wider the pool that you can spread it over, the more, first of all, cost efficient it is, the more affordable it is, and the greater coverage you achieve. If you're going to have private insurance and then cherry pick and leave the National Flood Insurance Program only with those that haven't been cherry picked, then you have a real problem on your hands. So, I would like to see what those proposals are, but there's a real cherry picking problem from my perspective. So,
I agree with Bob. I welcome the involvement of the private sector and private insurance companies, but they can't come in and just take the very best risks. They've got to share the risk with the American taxpayer.
anyone else? Yeah.
Did you ever entertain the idea of just forgiving the entire $25 billion debt? And if so, why did you land on just freezing the interest?
I think that's the art of the possible. In my own mind, the National Flood Insurance Program never was meant to be absolutely self-sufficient. Look, when there was Hurricane Katrina or Superstorm Sandy, we didn't ask people to pay back, the CDBG grants or the other flood assistance they got. We didn't charge them interest. There's a reason, I have voted over my 25 years in Congress for flooding of the Mississippi, wildfires in the West, certainly Katrina when it happened, which, by the way, part of the debt here is because of the failure of the Army Corps and its levies, about $12 billion in Katrina. That's why we call the country the United States of America. We're in it all together. And some things we cannot ultimately be prepared for in a way, although our bill changes that dramatically by trying to be more and more prepared, but you can't be prepared for it. So the reality of this being, we've had two major storms that have really driven the debt, but the reality of it is that, to repay it is going to be a difficult proposition. However, my own view is for the art of the possible, that the art of the possible is charging yourself interest. I think is a very compelling argument. It only perpetuates forever the debt because you never pay down debt. You're just constantly paying interest, and you're charging yourself interest, and that ultimately adds to greater lack of affordability. And the more people you drive out of the National Flood Insurance Program, well, the more you contract the pool. That's a problem. So I think we came down to at least I did came down to that view.
I have nothing to add to that. I agree.
It's the middle ground.
You know.
And it is the art of the possible. We're trying to get a bill passed.
Is there a cost to this bill? I mean, is it supposed to be revenue neutral? I mean, how do you score not making these interest payments that are going to Treasury now?
Well, twofold. First of all, we saved, as Senator Kennedy said, $400 million there. We also saving by capping the write your owns, I think about another $350 million. This is a year. So that's about $750 million. And I think there are other elements of this that will save money, as well as that when we finally move to mitigation, we get a 4-to-1 cost-benefit analysis. Not because any one of us say it, but the Government Accountability Office says it. So the reality is we think that those provide savings as well over the course of the bill. So we haven't had the bill scored yet because we just got it together and are introducing it, but we believe that in its totality, we believe those are great savings that when reinvested the way that we suggest it will broaden those who are in the National Flood Insurance Program, also save us money in that mitigation, and in the context of 6 years, we think that will be proven to be cost effective, so we're ready to argue that.
Does it have to be deficit neutral or anything like that?
I mean, listen, I have been here long enough to know that not everything that we do is deficit neutral or paid for. We didn't fully pay for the results of Katrina or Sandy, so because they are acts of God. We didn't create those acts. They're not man-made. So at the end of the day, there are times in which it isn't fully paid for. And so if fully paid for is the absolute standard, and I don't know how you get tax reform sitting on the Senate Finance Committee. I don't know how you get tax reform that's going to be fully paid for as envisioned. So I think this is a place of national importance, and I think we do pay a fair amount of it through those and other provisions.
Well, and look, you want to talk deficits? I'll tell you how you create deficits. Don't reauthorize the National Flood Insurance Program, or reauthorize a program that doesn't work, so that some people are required to carry flood insurance as a condition of their mortgage. Can you imagine what would happen if they don't have flood insurance and can't find it? They breach their mortgage. Can you imagine what will happen to the banking industry? What will happen to real estate prices? What will happen to local commerce? You want to talk deficits? What will happen to the tax base? You want to talk deficits. The quickest way to create deficits is not to pass this bill.
We've all had a front row seat to the NFIP's mismanagement and dysfunction. And as members of the Banking and Appropriations Committees, we are uniquely positioned to fix it. Our legislation, the Sustainable, Affordable, Fair, and Efficient, or SAFE National Flood Insurance Program Reauthorization Act, is the result of months of bipartisan collaboration and years of lessons learned, often the hard way. And we've learned many of those lessons in New Jersey after Superstorm Sandy, a storm that damaged 650,000 homes, left 8.5 million people without power, and tragically claimed dozens upon dozens of lives. Unfortunately, for many families who survived the natural disaster, their ordeal was just beginning. They would spend years suffering under a man-made disaster, a flood insurance program that was stacked against them at every turn. And to add insult to injury, the Biggert-Waters reforms of 2012 kicked in, slamming homeowners nationwide with huge premium increases. That's why I led the Senate to pass the Homeowners Insurance Affordability Act, and provide families with some relief. But today, premiums continue to rise, homeowners continue to abandon policies, and the NFIP continues to sink deeper into the red. We have to stop this vicious cycle. Americans deserve a flood insurance program that is sustainable for taxpayers, affordable for homeowners, and accountable to everyone. We have to turn the lessons we learned after Sandy into action, and that's exactly what the SAFE NFIP Act does. It levels the playing field for homeowners during the claims process. It tackles waste and abuse throughout the program. It puts those cost savings towards making premiums more affordable and our communities more resilient. To start, our bill puts the brakes on runaway premium hikes, lowering the cap on annual increases from 25 to 10%. Yet we don't stop there. Our bill shifts our entire flood response paradigm from one that solely focuses on rebuilding in the aftermath of storms and floods to one that actively works to prevent them. To do so, we create new incentives to help homeowners finance flood proofing, elevation, and other mitigation projects. These investments in resiliency will be worth every penny and then some. According to the GAO, every dollar spent on mitigation generates $4 in savings, and homeowners reap the benefits in the form of lower premiums. Our legislation also ends FEMA's reliance on outdated, inaccurate flood maps and invests in state-of-the-art flood mapping technologies like LIDAR. We pay for these investments in affordability and resilience in flood mapping, first by freezing interest payments on the NFIP's own debt. Beyond the insanity of having the federal government charge itself interest, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's $500 million that could be better spent on keeping premiums down and building more resilient communities. And we need to make those investments. Otherwise, the program will remain stuck in the past than rather ready for the future. We also generate savings by ridding the system of wasteful practices and perverse incentives that hurt homeowners and drive up costs for taxpayers. After Sandy, FEMA wasted tens of millions of dollars fighting homeowners in court, giving rise to an entire cottage industry of attorneys who get rich by dragging out litigation over flood claims. That needs to stop. Instead of letting flashy attorneys run up their billable hours on the taxpayer's dime, we propose the federal government start defending itself in court. We also reform the expensive middlemen, or write-your-owns, contracted out by FEMA. Today, private insurers pocket over 30% of every premium dollar paid, yet they bear none of the risk and have little reason to be responsive to customers. In fact, while insurers that overpay homeowners are sanctioned by FEMA, those who underpay flood victims get off scot-free. Our bill corrects this discrepancy, penalizing contractors that underpay homeowners with the same exact fines. We also do away with the bogus rules used to avoid paying out claims altogether, like deadlines only enforced for homeowners and never insurers, a Byzantine appeals process that lets FEMA play prosecutor, judge, and jury, and ludicrous loopholes like the earth movement exception that suggests soil somehow shifted itself during floods. Let me close with one more point. As we speak, there are proposals floating around Congress that suggest the answer to our flood insurance woes is to hike homeowners' premiums and leave communities in high-risk areas to fend for themselves. But the need for a well-functioning national flood insurance marketplace will only grow more critical in the years to come if that's our ultimate result. In an era of rising sea levels, the time for bold investments in coastal resilience and community flood prevention is now. We can't control every flash flood or tropical storm that comes our way, but we can control how we as a country prepare for such disasters. This legislation puts the lessons we learned after Superstorm Sandy and others into action, putting people ahead of insurance industry profits, making long overdue investments in mitigation and coastal resilience.